This thing?
Yeah.
This thing?
No, I did not know. I didn't know this.
No, we always sat like this and.
Yeah.
Hey, how you doing, Joe? How are you? You are streaming. Looks like you're streaming anyway.
Hey, good evening, folks. Thank you for joining us for the March 2025 Board of Water Commissioners meeting. We typically follow an agenda, but I know most of you are probably here because of some mailings recently that we've received, and you may have questions about the quality of the water and process in which we disinfect our water and perhaps distribute it to you. So I'm going to suspend our typical order and invite anyone from the public that would like to ask questions that may have been concerned. And that brings them to the meeting today.
So we have a couple of questions, but I'm here to follow up about, we were here in the October meeting about our rates, and I pulled the annual reports. And in 2023, okay, so we questioned why there was two rates, an inside rate and outside rate. So in 2023, it was $26.40, then 2024, it went to $31.68. And then for this year, it went to $38.02. That was for inside. Outside of NIAC, it went from $31.68 in 2023 to $38.02 in 2024, and then $45.62 in 2025. So that's a 44% increase in the last 2 years. So we question why residents, what defines inside and outside NIAC, right? So we were advised by the board that outside is considered West Nyack and Central Nyack, and that our rates are higher because Clarkstown charges taxes for the water distribution plant that sits in West Nyack. And that increase in those taxes are offset by West Nyack and Central Nyack.
And South Nyack.
And South Nyack. And so we asked about that, the disparity, and they told we were gonna get, there was gonna be an answer, it was gonna be looked into it. Nobody got back to us, right? And then we get the January rates, and there's still a disparity between the two. So can you clarify why our rates, being Central Nyack, West Nyack, and South Nyack, are higher than the rest of the facilities, right? Because the water treatment plant is literally feeding everybody water.
Yeah, I don't know if anyone wants to tackle that, but the answer is the same, is that it's because we pay taxes outside the village of Nyack. So the village of Nyack residents receive a benefit of the fact that they're not paying additional taxes, either to Orangetown or Clarkstown, for the infrastructure of the water distribution system. That's the one reason. And the other reason, as we mentioned last time, is that we cannot put on taxes. If someone in Central Nyack, West Nyack, or South Nyack refuses to pay their water bill, we have no means to get that money until the house is sold or the tenant moves out. In the village of Nyack, we can put it on the tax roll, and the county pays us that owed money. And then once there's some kind of termination with the ownership of the house, they sell the house, then the county gets paid back. So those are the two reasons. They haven't changed. And we're well aware, everyone, both inside and outside, our rates went up 20% in 24, 20% in 25. So that's you're on the money as far as the rates go. And the people inside the village pay the same 20%, but it's obviously a smaller per cubic foot of water charge than you usually pay.
Right, but beyond holding the taxes, right, let's pretend I don't pay my water bill, right? We're all still drinking the same water. So I shouldn't be charged more, actually I'm being penalized because I live in Central Nyack.
Well, you know, I was been talking to an administrator about that. You folks have a terrific civic organization in Central Nyack, and I would suggest that it might be beneficial for you to lobby the town of Clarkstown. I can tell you something you're not aware of, that because of a self tower that was just installed on our property in West Nyack, our town of Clarkstown bill doubled from $16,000 to $36,000 a year annually because of a reassessment. That cost is gonna be passed along, and that doesn't, we pay $67,000 to the Clarkstown School District. We're anticipating that doubling as well. So there are gonna be future increases related to increased tax burdens. So it's not going away, it's gonna get more, there's gonna be larger costs.
So who
So-
requested the cell phone tower? Like, was that Clarkstown? Did Clarkstown approach?
I don't know.
Can I clarify that?
Sure, right.
First of all, your tax assessor is here tonight, John Noto. He's the expert on taxes. The cell tower gets assessed 100 grand, the same as every other cell tower in town of Clarkstown. What occurred was with the construction of that and the permitting, the assessor's office came out and looked at the site for the first time in many years, probably, and applied a new assessment to the entire site. We're currently talking about actually walking that back and having intermunicipal agreement to not have to pay the increased taxes between the two towns.
It's benefiting from the cell tower.
The cell tower is for the public. It's for emergency response and it's for anybody who's got a cell phone who's in a cell phone hole over there.
But who gets the income from the cell tower?
It's split between the village's general fund and the water department's
So
fund.
Nyack receives the income.
Yes.
And how much income is that?
It depends on how many antennas they lease up there. Right now, I think it's roughly about $30,000 a year or something like that.
I believe it's $2,000 a month the villages receive.
Maybe $24,000
And that's
a
on the
year.
low end.
Yeah.
Of cell tower.
And we're hoping that more antennas get attached to it and their lease income goes up over time. But yeah, it's,
I'm gonna go back to, I've been living in Central Nyack for 34 years. And I pay my bill all the time and I pay it on time, but I'm still getting penalized because someone else might not pay. So on my way over here, I was thinking, maybe you have to ask for a deposit or something like that to start service that could come back to the person when the person moves. Because it doesn't make 34 years. You know, I was gonna ask for reparations, but I won't do that. But 34 years I've been paying my bill on time and I'm still paying extra in case I don't pay my bill. So there's no equity there. So maybe there's a different system rather than charging somebody ongoing more money. Maybe there is some kind of deposit when someone turns on the service.
Interesting concept.
Can I ask a question about the water? The source of the water that Nyack Water uses, it comes out of the Hackensack, correct?
Hang on. Are we finished with this conversation before we move conversations?
No, it's gonna be all the same general conversation about the different tax rate, different water rate. In Central Nyack, I'm Donald Franchino, I'm the councilman that represents for Clarkstown, West Nyack and Central Nyack. And I couldn't wrap around that there's two separate water rates. You're saying because of Clarkstown and the taxes, and you said Wildwood Clarkstown. But I want to go back to before this whole thing begins, is the water that you take for Nyack Water comes out of the Hackensack.
Correct. Flows over the dam into the Hackensack. And we take-
And is that metered?
the
Do you
water-
pay for
take
that
us-
water?
Tom, maybe you can take this.
The water that's brought in is master metered.
So master metered,
So we keep track of the water that we draw from. We typically take in 1.9 million gallons a day. We have the capacity up to 2.7, but we do keep track.
okay, and when it's metered, who do the funds go to?
So that would be depend on whether it's billable, whether it's used in-house. That would be probably a question for you on the billables.
I think we're confused. We don't pay, you're asking, do we pay to take the water out of the Hackensack?
Yes,
No, no, no.
We don't.
so that's technically free water that's coming from the town of Clarkstown. That's the point I'm making. Comes from Lake DeForest, which is all entirely in the town of Clarkstown. And it flows down to Hackensack, you extract the water out. All right? And because of taxes that the town charges on your plan, you increase the rates for the Clarkstown portion. Meanwhile, all the water you take comes from Clarkstown. Not a drop from anywhere else.
Actually, it comes from the sky, and I don't think any of that
Well,
water belongs to
I
the town
mean-
of Clarkstown.
Viola maintains Lake DeForest, the water's held there, if there was no dam, that water would disappear. The
Yeah,
point I'm making
Well, the water
is you're
freeze.
getting water at no expense, correct?
Well,
No
Mr.
expense.
Franchino, I think it bears clarification that the village has an entitlement to a certain portion of the Hackensack River through the DEC permitting process. It goes back generations. And that's the way the water is allocated between Veolia, Nyack Water Department, and the downstream rights in New Jersey.
And I met with Viola, I'm gonna mushroom this into something very big, because I'm defending the residents of Clarkstown who are paying a higher rate for water here. If we can't come to an agreement that everybody pays the same rate, you pass your expenses along to your customers. And if we can't arrive at a situation where everybody pays the same rate and nobody's discriminated against the portion of Clarkstown, there is a movement afoot to divest Central Nyack and West Nyack from Nyack Water. And that includes the Palisade Center. And say they're gonna be given a choice. You wanna stay with Nyack Water, or do you wanna move out? So I'm giving you the opportunity, and I don't wanna hear about taxes and lobby Clarkstown. All right, because that's an expense on Nyack Water. Split it up among all of your customers, and they should pay the same rate that everyone pays. Veola Water does not break down communities and say, well, this community is gonna pay more than this community. They don't do that. All right, you have chosen to do that. So I don't want, if this can't be resolved and everybody pays the same rate, you have your expenses, break them down. Don't lobby Clarkstown for the taxes that are on that plan, because you also pay Nyack school taxes. Correct?
We're in the Nyack School District.
Right. And the plant is in Clarkstown and Clarkstown School District. And you pay those school taxes, and those are the only school taxes you pay. Is Clarkstown.
So I would just say, be careful what you wish for, since Veolia's rates are a lot higher than ours are.
I will dispute that.
Okay,
All right.
I'd like to see that.
Because I've met with them and we've broken it down. And I'm only talking about Central Nyack and West Nyack and the Palisade Center. That's what I'm talking about. If we can't come to an agreement that you as a board decide everyone that is a customer of Nyack Water, regardless of them not paying bills within the village, that's a separate issue. They should not have to deal with it. But what I'm getting at is an equal rate for everyone. Regardless of where you live in the Nyack water distribution system. And if that can't be resolved, then we go to the next step. So I'm putting it back on you. If you're gonna stay with the rates that you have and they pay higher rates because they live in Central Nyack or even West Nyack, then we gotta do something. And we have to act. And believe me, we will act. So I give it back to you. If you want to stand on, lobby the town of Clarkstown about the taxes on the plant. My argument there is you're pulling water out and not paying a dime for the water you're pulling out. That originates in the town of Clarkstown. So,
Yeah, of course, yeah. Well, clearly, we're not gonna make a determination tonight.
Oh, I know.
We don't assume
I
that's
know.
gonna happen. So we'll take that under advisement. It doesn't sound unreasonable. And we will look into if there are any alternative rate structures that we can apply that will be beneficial to the people outside the village of Nyack. We certainly will.
it's big for these people.
Yeah, I get it. We've met
Yeah.
a number of times. I understand.
But now it's time that you will decide which way you're gonna go. And then either you get back to me or John Noto, he's our tax assessor. He came along to explain the taxes that exist on that property. But now you have cell tower and that income will only increase. You're on the low end of cell towers as far as income. They generate much more.
Yeah, that's before any carriers go up, so we anticipate that too.
Yes.
So on the assessment issue, the impact you already have on the school, so you shouldn't see any increase on that. That affected the last school bill,
Okay,
okay,
good
so,
to know.
you know, which I gave to Mr. Stewart, it's an opinion of council which says two municipalities can enter into an agreement that says they won't tax the authority. So that could resolve any of the tax issue that you're charging these folks for additional taxes. In addition, you mentioned lien enforcement, when somebody doesn't pay, you know, I did lien enforcement for years for the county, all by statute. So I would ask if I'm the public, I'm a citizen as well, what statute allows you to levy a fee on something that hasn't happened on the folks that are being penalized for not paying? So, you know, if it's not in the statute, you really can't charge an additional fee for lien enforcement that hasn't happened. You know, I think it's easy enough for us to work out the agreement, the intermunicipal agreement, so that property will effectively be exempted outside of special districts. So that whole burden will be lifted. That plant services a water district in total. That burden should be spread out amongst that water district in total. You know, there's no reason one side should be getting penalized for the other, so.
If we're successful in getting that tax, reduced or eliminated, then there's no argument.
And that could have happened at any time in the past, just, you know, it came to light when,
Andy and I were just.
We went out
this
and-
week, yeah.
you know, noticed a lot of, you know, structures on the property, and by law, we have to capture them back. So we did, we'll resolve it and we do that quickly.
I look forward to it. Yeah, that's terrific. I think that'll resolve our problem. As well. For you?
My name's Emil Herscher. I'm a South Nyack resident. This is the first water meeting that I've attended. But I do know Miss Latoya because she processes my water bill every time. But I am here today because of an issue that I feel is public safety. It relates to the health, safety of our water. And I'm probably not the only one in the room that's here for that. So I would love some clarity. I would love to hear from Mr. Thomas Lynch, superintendent, and also the engineers that are consulting on this project as well. I'm not familiar with you all, so I don't know who that is. But I would love to get some clarity because from what I've heard, it's an issue between our superintendent and the engineers, and they're kind of blaming each other, and it's a bit of a he say, she say. I don't know what's going on, so would love some clarity around that. I'm very concerned, and it's not okay.
Yeah, I think there's been a lot of public misconception about what's actually going on, and we came to the right place because Jim Moran is an engineer for H2, and Tom is right here at the right side, so I'm gonna let them answer that question for you. They can be satisfied rather quickly.
So I do want to thank you for coming because yours was probably one of the better Facebook posts that I had seen. A lot of the questions that you had, we have been involved in addressing, everything down to the sedimentation, the organics in the water. These are not things that have been neglected, and we have definitely been on top of it. I don't know where you got the inclination that we were having infighting. There was things that were happening, trying to deal with a complex issue, and there was a lot of competing interests and exercises that were going on at the same time. Jim's here who can explain the more scientific side of the things that were going on. So do you have a specific question?
Yeah, my questions are, you know, we keep getting these notices about our water failing to meet the standard health and safety requirements. So I feel like it's alarming, and I want to know what steps are being taken to rectify that, and by what date we can see that change.
So more specifically, and you tell me if I'm wrong, I think you're directing it towards the contact time. The contact time violation.
The most recent violation.
Yeah, but
Yes.
you know, I've been saving the notices. I feel like there's been quite a few, and I feel like there's been
Okay.
two more recently that have been a little
Yeah.
bit back to back.
Okay, so I see some other heads shaking, so also what's happening is what we call trihalomethane in the water. So let me see if I can break it down for you one at a time. So the contact time issue, what was happening there was that we were gently lowering the dosage of the chlorine application in the process at the plant. At the same time, we were analyzing the system residuals throughout the village of Nyack using the fire hydrants to see at what point would we still maintain compliance, but using as little chlorine as possible. Obviously, you don't want us putting too much chlorine in. And this was all part of the process of trying to chase down the problem with the trihalomethanes that have arisen in the system. Okay, because the interaction between the chlorine and the organic materials in the water, which, and I'm glad Mr. Franchino brought it up, does have a direct association with the source water. Okay, so in the process of doing that, there wasn't a notification to the health department that we were doing that and going to a lower dose application. And for the most part, that's what we got violated for. Okay, with everything going on, there was a little miscommunication. But saying that, the routine sampling and analysis were being conducted on a daily basis. There was no boil water order. There was no bacteria that was discovered in any of the samples that we sent to the lab. So when you speak of safety, I'm all over it. You know, yeah,
Can I repeat back to you what you just said to
Sure.
make sure that
sure.
that I'm understanding, and maybe then Emil can also reflect back what you just said. So what I heard you say is that the non-compliance had to do with a delay in communication between the water authority and the Department of Health,
That's fair.
but at no time was there a below standard amount of chlorine residual in our water
That's
system.
correct. That's correct.
And we were testing it in two places. One is in the plant and one was throughout the system using fire hydrants.
That's correct.
Okay, Emil, do you want to repeat back what you understood from what we just said?
The sediment in the, I can't recall the name of the,
Sedimentation?
You
yeah.
can say how you understand it. You don't have to use the same words that were used here.
Oh, what, it begins with a T, what is it?
Otherwise,
Let's say THM.
THM.
For sure.
THN, oh, trihalomethanes?
Yes, very good.
Okay.
Yeah,
So the chlorine is offsetting, it's basically balancing the THN, right?
yeah, I would say no to the way you presented it.
So I'm gonna try to boil it down as
Wait,
simple as
instead
possible.
of explaining it to him, can you tell us what you understood?
So from what I got, from Mr. Lynch's explanation was that we're introducing chlorine into the water and we're doing it in a more gentle way or trying to slowly increase it to not over chlorine. Well,
Yes.
to
That's
not,
how you understood it?
yeah, to not
That's right.
have too much chlorine in the water. But apparently there was not enough added to meet standards.
Okay, so that last part
Yeah.
is not what we said.
Okay,
What we said is that there was a lack of communication from the change of process.
okay,
At all times, the water was in compliance with the amount of chlorine residual in the water system, and it was checked in two places.
Right.
It was checked in the plant and it was checked throughout the system. So what happens when we put chlorine in the system, it reacts with the organics. So
the organics being the THN.
the THM.
Yeah. The THMs are a product of
Byproduct,
interaction.
Yeah,
It's a
THMs are created by the by adding the chlorine, so that's,
Chlorine.
we were trying to reduce the amount of chlorine to ultimately reduce the amount of THMs.
Okay.
THMs is a byproduct of chlorinating water.
Got it.
That's what you
There we
you
go.
need to understand.
That was the-
They're not in there already, it's basically the organic material that we kill, the bacteria that we kill with the chlorine, it doesn't disappear. So it stays as a residual and it's a THM and it's found in very minute amounts to be, potentially be a carcinogen. And so because of that, we are very serious about restricting the amount that's out in the system, so that's why we check.
So it's my understanding that more trihalomethanes are produced in stagnant water.
Correct.
And that there isn't enough pulling from what used to be the college.
That's one of our running theories.
Right.
So I'm gonna jump in.
Wait, just let her finish what she's saying.
One of the things that I wonder about, and I'm all for suggestions here because I don't want Nyack Water to go away. I really appreciate being able to pick up the phone and talk to somebody.
Glad you
But
said.
so is there a piece of technology, and I'll ask the engineer, that could be put in the reservoir to keep the water circulating, even if there's a pull, less of a pull from that area?
Have you been monitoring our intercommunication?
I was gonna say,
I've seen that as information that only
No, I'm just
insiders would have, but
trying to figure out
you're right.
solutions rather than.
so are we, you're right on target.
So as you stated, first, the chlorination is done in two parts. It's done at the front of the plant, when the raw water comes in from the Hackensack and pre-filters. Right, then it goes through the plant, then it's done post of that before it goes into the distribution system. The THMs are more prominent when there's a lot of organic matter, so before it goes into the filter.
Mhm.
So the adjustments were done was to try to lower that chlorine dosage at the front part of the plant. So that you produce less THMs, which is a chlorine disinfectant byproduct.
Right.
And then boost it at just before it leaves the plant. So that you maintain proper chlorine residual in the distribution, including the college zone. And the college zone is most sensitive to the chlorine residual, because chlorine dissipates over time, so it's sitting in the mains and it's reacting with the metals and it's being consumed by whatever is in that water. So when the water is stagnant or sitting in a zone of least consumption,
Mhm.
it's not circulating, right?
Mhm.
So the THM start to come back up again. And so, but you can't just keep boosting that, because then you get
Overchlorinated.
over too much, and you have too much chlorine, then you get chlorine, THM throughout the whole system. So it's a balancing act, so it's a constant balancing act, and it's also temperature dependent as well. So the THMs are produced more when the temperature drops, when it goes down lower, so the colder it is.
I thought it was the other way.
The opposite,
When it gets hot.
I'm sorry, when it gets hot. So this is all part of the balancing act that's done at the plant. So looking at the THM and trying to control the THM production led to what Tom was talking about was the contact time. That's the amount of time the chlorine is in the water, in the plant. So everyone was trying to reduce the amount of chlorine, and they didn't notify the health department that they were reducing the.
I understand.
So that was the second violation. First violation was for THM production, and that's a difficult thing to kind of get a handle on, because it's a rolling average over 12 months.
So let me just stop you now.
Yeah.
I only want to interrupt because behind me is a map with the red outline that indicates the targeted area that has the exceedance. And I wanted to share that with everyone because we did a system-wide notification out of precaution. Okay, but the specific area is outlined right here along South Highland Avenue, up by the Old Nyack College, the new yeshiva, and that zone. So in that zone, if you look over at the chart that I put up on the table, at the bottom of each section, it says total THM4. We have 4 quarters that we do the sampling, and that's the rolling average of those 4 quarters. That's what Jim was speaking about. If we have a bad quarter, in the summer where it's hotter and there's an escalation of THMs. We have to wait until that quarter is then sampled again and averaged again in order to get that number down. So the violations for the THMs were not to exceed 80. And you can see in both illustrations, I think for the South Highland Pump House, we were 82.9. So we were just a little bit over. And then the one below, which is the Boone Center, it's 88.4. So again, that represents this zone that generated the public notice. And we have to do the public notice. We have to be transparent. The health department would not let us operate if we weren't transparent with what was happening. Now, you'll
Wait,
notice,
Can we just have a pause?
Yeah.
That was a lot of information. And it's a lot of numbers. Do you want me to do the recap in like the quasi layman's in 3 sentences?
Why not?
Actually,
Go ahead.
I just wanna talk about the third quarter,
Mhm.
Okay.
because you are highlighting this 80, this like level of 80.
Yeah.
And I understand the sampling, and how like you'll have to wait and there'll be a period, where you'll have to say, okay, let us assess, how do we deal with this? But then what's happening when something like that occurs in our system, and how are we notified in a moment like that? What does that mean for us? What precautions do we as individuals need to take? These things like kind of get into that zone of things.
So you're asking us that when the THM level is above what is allowable
Yeah,
and it has to be reported, what actions do you need to take?
yeah, and what does that reporting look like?
And
Because
what does the reporting?
I appreciate hearing how this person here, thank you, Emil, for sharing what you've gotten notifications on and what I've gotten notifications on are totally different. And I do realize that that is different section to section, Nyack to Central to Village, I understand that. But also, I would love to hear how this gets handled, if that's like, just to give some clarity as to the process of how you're interfacing with us as the public.
Okay, so where do we need to look? Where do we as the public need to look for the information when the water system is outside of compliance barriers? Do you wanna answer that question?
Sure. So when we do public notification, it's posted on our website. We do mailing, or we do knock and posts documents on your door. We do have a mass notification system, but I tend to be very judicious on how I use it, because I don't want it to get to a point where everyone is getting SMS text messages and now they start to ignore it. I tend to use it more for an emergency. And although you may feel that this is an emerging issue, it's not really classified
Sure.
at that level.
So-
But I want to address what you said about the third quarter.
Yeah.
So that was the heat of the summer. That was dead summer. Now, but you'll see it is high. Okay, but it's not, if the calculation of the rolling average is not above 80, then it's not considered an actionable notification. Okay, but to try to soothe you a little on this, the first quarter of 2025, our number shows 47.1 on the top example. That's a nice number.
Well, I
Okay.
mean, it's winter, right?
It's winter,
Right.
right? And,
Yeah.
but if the second quarter and the third quarter does come down, that's going to help with that rolling average and bring us back into compliance.
Yeah,
But
do we go by,
unlikely due to climate,
Yeah.
change.
Yeah.
Like, that's an unlikely number to decrease or to really, like, that's a huge, huge factor. And I know we have this upcoming resilience kind of thing going on that we're trying to like get into, but this is a real, like, these are on the up and ups. So I do think that that's something to maybe,
Yeah.
to talk about.
And it's not ignored, and I think that's what Jim is gonna help give some light on what we've been doing, both from the standpoint of process within the water plant, the repair of things that we have found, that needed some attention. All of these things combined, I believe will affect those numbers in a lower, scale. So, I don't know, maybe you can explain the things that we've been doing.
If I could just ask something, just to piggyback off what Zanetta was asking about. I think what I was hearing was that, is there a way for you to communicate with us on a quarterly basis as these numbers continue to come in? That I understand, Tom, you don't want to send SMS out.
Yeah.
Is it an email? Is it a newsletter? Is it a piece of mail? Can we be notified quarterly around this?
Right,
Is
because
that
some of it is
information put on the website quarterly?
Well,
The easiest way and the least expensive way to do it.
It's a good question, and I'm not dismissing it. At this present moment, the only time I am reaching out is when we're mandated by violation. Okay, but what you're asking for is how do we kind of keep a running discussion?
Well,
Yeah.
we're interested in,
Right.
this is ongoing, right?
I think we could get a quarterly report on our website. I don't know why that
Because
would be.
we
health
failed,
concern.
but we failed 6 out of 8 of those,
Okay, so hold on.
right? Regardless of an average.
I have a really dumb question to ask, so you could tell me it's dumb, but I live right down around the block from where the Boone Center is. And why is that just a problem there? How is that contained into just that area and not coming to my house?
So,
I just want to add, in your mailing, and I know it's a precautionary mailing, but there's a paragraph that says if you have severe
Suppressants, yeah.
right, if you're pregnant, if you have an infant, or you're elderly. I'm elderly. Seriously,
Excuse me.
right? And I need to know, I mean, I'm boiling my water and putting it through a 0 water pitcher, but I can't do that for washing dishes or washing my body or vegetables are just too much. So I'm really concerned about health and how is it just contained there and not seeping into around the corner?
so the direct answer about the zone issue as to where it's been prevalent, we did find that we had a main, a 6-inch main, that's somewhere along the history of the department had been isolated on South Boulevard inside the pump house. And we determined that there was a bad check valve, and we replaced both the check valve and the valve itself. We recharged the line to start to move water. We are looking at other methods like mixers, and again, Jim can present what that's about, to move the water, as you had mentioned earlier, for that zone, because for a period of time, and I'm gonna say 2 years, maybe 3 years, the consumption of the water from that area where the yeshiva is now really was insufficient compared to what it was before. Okay, back in the day when Nyack College was there, they would run the field sprinklers all the time. That was consumption, that moved a lot of water. Okay, things have developed in that area now where the consumption now is starting to pick up. I'm hoping that that's part of the equation to bring down these numbers. So you want to talk about the mixers and some of the other?
Yeah, so, there was different action items that we've looked at, so one of them is short term that, I'm gonna give credit to Tom, was automatic flushes, so install them on the hydrants or put a new sampling hydrant out there and flush the water during these periods of high temperature to circulate some of that water through, because we're not getting it through consumption. So that's short term, let's say, not a long term measure. The other intermediate action item that we looked at is mixers. There are mixers, and we're going to explore this further. We've deployed them in other parts of where we are consultants for other water companies. And they mix the water, and they have an air column that strips the THMs out of the water that's in the mixer.
Is it in the plant?
it can be installed either in a tank or a plant. It can be in both.
So just to, again, not to cut you off. So we have in our main reservoir up on Dickinson, we have two compartments. We have a newer compartment and then we have the older, more original tank. And that's the area that feeds this zone that's in question. And because of the lack of consumption from this zone, that water sits in that tank longer than the one in the front. So the idea is to put a mixer into that older tank to keep the water mixed up and aerated and, you know, as Jim said, to kind of strip things and move it along.
And that's the only zone that gets water from the older tank?
Yes,
And then there's a long-term solution, which would be the PFAS plant. The PFAS plant, you're in compliance now, but you won't be in compliance shortly. We've designed it, as of Monday. The New York State Department of Health has approved the design. They asked us to now submit final plans and specs to go forward with it. PFAS, the way you treat PFAS is granular activated carbon filters. They're very effective against THMs. So you get kind of a dual benefit, PFAS removal and THM removal. So that is the long-term solution.
I have a few questions, if you don't mind. This graph over here and the numbers. So let me understand, the first quarter, that's 2025, right? The second and third quarter, which quarter, is that from last year?
2024.
2024?
Yeah, I'm sorry, did it not copy over? Okay,
No.
Yeah, I
okay,
did.
I can correct that.
Okay, so that's from last year?
Yeah.
Okay, question number one. Question number two is the area of the of Nyack College, is that the only area that you're having these excursions above the THM numbers?
Yes, however, there can be some escalations in other areas. We have certain sampling points. Okay, but this is where the concentration has been. And that's why if it was only one, if it was just the Boone Center alone, it would not have been a system-wide notification. It would have been just for that zone.
Right.
But because we had two hits,
Right.
both the Boone Center and the pump house.
Right.
Now, that South Highland pump house is what pumps the water from the reservoir to the Boone Center. Now, we have sampled the reservoir, we've sampled the pipeline going down to the pump house, and they were fine. It's only when we get to that area of the pump house and the Boone Center in that zone. And because there was two hits, everyone felt for precaution, let's just notify everyone.
Okay, so my next question is, how many sampling stations do you have? Do you sample the entire distribution network? Or are you concentrating on that area?
No, we sample constantly, whether it's the hospital, Village Hall, South Highland Pump House, Westgate, and the Boone Center.
Okay, and what were the results for all the other centers? They were below the,
I didn't bring them, but they were below, so we were good, so that's why I didn't bring them as an example.
okay, when you take a sample, what's the time lag between the time that you take the sample and it's analyzed, and you send the sample out to be analyzed?
Yes,
How long does that take?
that could take a couple of weeks, so that's a good question. Because we have to send it to the lab has to process it, and then by the time they get the report back to me, it could be 2 weeks.
So that's basically the historic number, not an actual current. Is that something that you could do in-house?
No, we don't have that capability.
What kind of test do they, is that a microbiological test?
I think if you look there, it says analyte code. I think that would indicate to you what type of testing that they're doing.
Is there any way to expedite the testing results?
Not that I'm aware of, unless we have our own in-house lab for that. We do have a lab and we do test,
Right,
but we don't test for that.
you have to do that.
Yeah.
What? And you say that it's seasonal, in other words, winter numbers is higher or lower?
Low.
Lower. Summer it'll be higher. Okay. And how often do you do the testing? How often do you take samples?
So it's every quarter,
Just one sample for each location,
every quarter,
every quarter?
yes.
That's it for now.
Yeah, ladies and gentlemen, I have to get these two gentlemen back to New City.
Thank you.
So I thank you for your time, and I'm sure we're gonna talk as it goes on. All right, I'll see you at Civic tonight.
I had this young lady waiting, yeah.
You called me young, thank you. Thank you for the forum. I've lived in Nye for over 40 years and I had no idea that this was an option. I love
Every
water.
Thursday, every third Thursday of the month,
Thank you.
4:30, you're welcome.
You might see me again, I don't know. I just want to really, and I see Jack here, but the crews work in all weather at all hours, and I have nothing but respect for that, really. And he's not even paying attention.
No, he's busy.
Thank you. My question, I live in Central Nyack, and I can't see exactly what the zone is, but I know you're talking about South Boulevard and the yeshiva. The yeshiva is maybe a 7-minute walk through the woods to my house on Willow Avenue. So I have a couple of questions. I don't know if that's affecting Willow Avenue in Central Nyack. But I have a couple of questions. My water smells and tastes like chemicals in the last 6 or 8 months, and it is disgusting. I don't want to brush my teeth with it. I don't want to shower in it. I have a 5-stage filtration system that I use, which I reviews anyway. And I just want to say historically, I'm a longtime Rockland resident. I grew up over Clawville Mountain in the West Nyack area, Western Highway. We had well water, and my parents' friends who lived in Central Nyack used to come with big containers to fill up because the water's coming out brown. So Central Nyack has had and I saw it, right? So this is not hearsay. It's historically had horrible water, but it was bearable up until within the last year. So why is it's not palatable? And then the other question is not quite related to the quality or lack thereof of the water. And it's my understanding, and I'm not an expert, that each house has to have 35 PSI for water intake. My neighbors just moved in, there are like 7 adults in the house. If they flush a toilet, I lose water pressure. I've always had decent water pressure. Central Nyack's also notorious for having bad water pressure. That was my little secret for the last 20 years, is that I had good water pressure while I'm with the rest of the club. So is that true? And can it be rectified? And why does water taste like the dry cleaner chemicals?
So you've got several questions.
It's not acceptable.
Yeah, that's fine. I'll try to cover each one. And maybe Jack can help me on this since he's in the audience. Willow is definitely in that zone. And I think you're on the lower side of that zone.
I'm on the hill. I'm by the towards the yeshiva.
Okay, but when I say lower side, this is one of the reasons why I want to put in automatic flushers on specific hydrants that I'm looking at, to keep the water moving, right? You might be getting a collection of sediment and some of the water from other things that we're doing. And part of that, as Jim has said too, is we're trying to cut off some of the organics at the plant. And it connects, your question connects with Emil, is that there is certain infrastructure that we've been working on that once repaired will make a dramatic change in the organics and, you know, the feeling that you're getting not quality water. Okay, I think one of the things Emil had brought up was the sedimentation. Inside the sedimentation tanks, we have what we call scrapers or flight scrapers that pulls the sludge out that we separate from the source water. We've repaired one exquisitely, that's working perfectly, and we have one pending. Hopefully within the next 2 to 3 weeks, I'll have that all back up and running. But these have been legacy problems that we're finally able to overcome. You know, that being said, I will certainly look at yours and maybe.
Come and have a drink of water.
I
dare you.
I'll take that there.
Let's
I'll
go.
take that there. Not to be a wise guy, but to actually come see what's going on and take some samples, you know,
I appreciate that.
from your
Thank you.
house. I think the other question that you had was it taste and odor?
Piece
Or-
of
or
water and
pressure.
then water pressure.
Pressure. So that's interesting, because I've not shied away from the concerns of the pressure that Central Nyack has presented. We are doing water main replacements, as you know. I think we put in 3,100 feet this year or last year. These do make a difference in the volume of water that you're getting. The pressure issue, I have started to take some static pressures and residual pressures. The complexity with that is that I have to take pressures when the reservoir is full, and I have to take pressures when the reservoir is low, in order to see, are we losing pressure because of the drafting down of the reservoir? And again, this all predates me. There's certain areas too that, I'm sorry, Mr. Franchino had to leave, but there's certain areas that report low pressure that were never considered when they were built for Nyack Water or having any booster enhancements during the development of those areas. There's really not much I can do with that. And we have come to some agreements with the fire departments that there's a process called relay, where if they did have an issue with fire, they would use their pumpers and we would, work through it that way. But I will say this to you. Aside from your concerns of overall pressures and toilet flushing, if there was any issue for fire in Central Nyack, we have conveyed to them to let us know. And if the plant is not online, we will put the plant in service to pressurize the water mains further. But I have started to record some of those pressures to examine them. And I have to collect that data, and it takes time. So I don't want you to think I'm ignoring.
I'm very patient.
Okay.
And the water company's been extremely responsive to any concern I've had in 20 years, so.
But
thank you.
Cheryl has been screaming about water pressure. I don't know how long.
But-
So how long is this data collection?
Well, as I said, it takes a
Like
while.
at least 5 years I've heard Cheryl complain about this
Yeah,
at
well, I-
But
every
it's
meeting.
it's also new. I mean, my water didn't used to taste like
Yeah.
chemicals a year ago, so I don't,
So
what is the change?
So we've been going through a lot of these processes, as we said, to try to adjust how we're treating the water, how to get trihalomethane out. We've been flushing tanks and doing all kinds of activities. So you might be getting some of the residual from that, so,
Thank you for your.
It's my
answer.
understanding,
yeah.
and I know I talked to you about this, and I talked to the building department in Clarkstown. New builds are supposed to have 35 pounds per square inch. We've had several new houses
About
built.
4 in my.
The old regulation for old houses is 21 pounds per square, right? So the building department told me, Clarkstown Building Department told me that it's up to the contractor. Now, I know I told you that maybe if that pressure isn't where it's supposed to be, those people shouldn't get a water meter. Because that's what, I called New York State and I spoke to the people in Albany. And there's a whole thing about that the system has to be closed to get that 35 pounds. So I'm not sure what that means, but I do know that it's not 21 pounds per anymore for new builds. So
There's a lot of things in that, and I wanna just repeat it back to you to make sure that I'm understanding what you're saying. So, you're saying in Central Nyack, for the last 5 years, you have not had even 21 pounds per square inch
that's not what I
of water
said.
pressure.
That's not what I
I
said.
said 5. Like, that's how long she's been complaining about this. How long have we had this issue?
34 years.
Okay, so for the last
Since you
34
moved
years.
in, right?
Since I got a water pump, right? Since
Booster pump.
a booster pump, right?
So, can I interrupt you? Explain how the system works. I don't know if everybody knows how the water system works. It's,
Oh, we were getting there.
can you explain,
Yeah.
or Jim?
It's a gravity fed system. And so it's been grandfathered in, and that's part and parcel of some of the concerns that you have. And because it's grandfathered in a gravity fed system, Short of an investment, and I'm just gonna be random, of $5 million to put a tower up or something to correct that. We haven't gotten to any discussion as to who would pay for that, okay? It is difficult, especially with the new additions that you're talking about, the new development. You know, how do you now take something that's been grandfathered in to be as it is? It's a very difficult question. Now, as far as the 5 years go, I've only been superintendent for 3, so I am being as responsive as I can and trying to address whatever was not addressed or you felt was not addressed. But I will tell you that as far as the pressure in the system, if we meet the 20 PSI, that's compliant. There are certain areas that I discussed just moments ago that if they are not reaching that and they're on a high elevation, higher than or equal to the elevation of our reservoir, you're going to expect some low pressure. And that's why booster pumps are the best solution for people who are in those type of areas. And we do have some of those developments. And as I said, the permit process to develop those kind of locations are not taking into consideration the fact that we have a gravity fed system. And in particular, there's a certain area where it is in Clarkstown. We don't have permit control in Clarkstown. So if Clarkstown issues a permit to build, but there's no consideration for the water pressure on a high elevation, how does NIAC address it? It's a very difficult
That's a really
discussion. You understand? It's
very interesting question. It's very, very interesting. I do wonder about that, like, that could be permitted, yet not assessed.
Well,
And
perhaps we'll
how-
piggyback that
Well,
on
I'm
to.
sorry, I actually wasn't finished with that thought. And that when that isn't being assessed, how people who already exist in this area are so deeply impacted,
So completely one.
Impacted.
that you're impacted by things that aren't really, they're being permitted, but then aren't being understood in a whole view. So please, I'm sorry.
No, it's quite right, and I absolutely agree with you, and I think maybe working in unison with the town of Clarkstown regarding the tax issue that we brought up tonight, and you did, that we're certainly gonna get to the bottom of and hopefully resolve successfully for you. That should be included in the planning process. It should have been the contractor, any new house is going, you know, not us giving them a meter, they should, before they can get a building, not a building permit, but a C of O, they need to prove to the Clarkstown Planning Department that they've got the water pressure required. And they're not draining from existing pressure of their neighbors, so that's an absolute good point, and that's something that should be discussed with the town of Clarkstown.
You know, we're caught between 2 municipalities, and that's our problem, because we live in Clarkstown, you provide our water, and that's been an issue of communication, and maybe you can push some of that communication with Clarkstown for us, because we're stuck, you know?
I disagree, Cheryl. I feel like we're not stuck because Clarkstown listens to us, and you know that representation.
But Clarkstown doesn't really.
They need to communicate.
That's what I'm
Yeah.
saying, that's what
Yeah.
I'm saying, sorry.
Yeah, please, go ahead.
My question is for Tom and Jim. Regarding those 2 systems you mentioned, the first one to kind of stir the water and aerate it and keep it moving to help control the THMs. That, and then there was a long-term system that you mentioned, Jim. When can we expect to see those systems implemented? Here.
So I'll jump on that one. I actually have a meeting Monday with a potential company that we could do business with that offers a mixer aerator. And the price to me is very attractive, much more attractive than I've seen, and that's been one of the roadblocks, right? We have to be aware, you know, of our budget, and I'm optimistic. So Monday, I do have a meeting, and if it's successful, I mean, implementation is just a matter of approvals. And, you know, the other thing too is when I say approvals, understand, you know, we may have tripped up when it came to the contact time and notification with the health department. And again, a lot of things are going on at one time. All of these things have to clear the health department's approvals with engineered drawings. And you get protracted time in all of this, you know, and then there's questions that have to be answered and then re-questioned. So I couldn't sit here and tell you, hey, 3 months.
Right.
You know, look, if there was a fire, I'd run through the door in an instant. There wouldn't even be any discussions, right? But in things like this, we have to make sure that things are covered, right? Do it once and do it right.
Right.
Can I just to add to that, though, we are in phase 2 of what's about a $15 million capital improvement in the system with the water mains, which will help with tuberculation, which will help with the old rusty pipes that were trapping the THMs. And as you heard from Jim, just this past Monday, it's been a 3.5-year process of developing and getting approval for this PFAS plant, which is a $6 million plant that we should be breaking ground if everything works out according to plan by this fall, which will then significantly, hopefully, help the THMs downstream. So just, I want you to go away, hopefully tonight, with the understanding that we're working diligently. We've invested tremendous resources. We understand your concerns, and we are actually, you know, we're doing everything we physically can to address them and to maintain and upgrade the water department.
Thank you so much for that.
Yeah, of course.
And just so I'm clear, we are moving in the PFAS plant direction. That's
Yes,
the
we're
long-term
building a
solution that we're
PFAS.
looking at.
We've been waiting for the approval. There's been a lot of goalpost moving, you know, from the regulators and expectations of drawings and maybe an addition here.
And the standards were reduced significantly in the
Yeah.
process, so we'll have to go back for a redesign because they reduced, the EPA reduced the amount of PFASs that were allowed in the water in the process of the design, so that set us back quite a bit of time.
So
New York
As well
State
as
has,
COVID and-
New York State has a standard. The EPA standard was lower at one point. Now they're tougher. Their standard's tougher. So this will meet a tougher standard.
And I see hands are up. I just want to say one thing. And I don't want to get ahead of myself because I don't want to make promises that you're going to hate me if it doesn't happen, but there are grumblings that possibly by June is when the shovel's going to go in the ground to start, you know, with the PFAS building process. And if that happens, then again, as Jim said, that's going to have a huge effect because it's going to be pre-filtered. It's going to be taking the raw water from the source water before it even gets into the plant to draw out the organics. And again, the source water is an interesting discussion too, you know, from coming from the Hackensack. you know.
Yeah.
Yes.
It's a quick one. So that means if that PFAS system is going to be implemented at the source or close to the source, that means that by the time it gets to the individual pump stations, it's already been filtered and treated.
It'll be
So
a
you
lot
don't
better.
need something at each pump station.
Yes.
It's the water, the treatment is essentially finished when it leaves the plant.
Okay.
So the PFAS plant is being built in adjacent to our water treatment facility. They're gonna be one facility. So we're gonna hit PFAS first, then it's gonna go into our water treatment facility, and then it gets distributed out.
Where is the facility?
It's in West Nyack. It's ready. You see that new Jaguar dealership being built on 59 by the Palisades Mall?
Yeah.
There's a huge building, that's a Jaguar Land Rover car dealership, and our water plant is directly behind it. Yeah, there's a landscape truck that's prominently parked right out in front, promoting this gentleman's business, and you can just, when you look for the landscape truck, and the driveway's right behind it. Yeah. And look for the new cell tower. There's a, I don't know, 150-foot cell tower, that's another identifier.
Oh, goody.
I think she's been waiting.
Yeah.
I've been waiting a moment. I'd like to ask a question. This is maybe related, but I haven't heard it brought up yet. And that's the salinity of the water, because it's been so salty
Yes.
that it was incredibly undrinkable, and for many people that I've talked to.
I'm glad you asked.
And I'm also coming at this, I'm just gonna say that in my own background, my mom is a water quality specialist. And so I'm not coming at this not knowing anything about this situation. So I'd really like to get some true like discussion, that has not ever been discussed in any kind of memo that I have seen out. And I have had to buy water all winter long because it has been incredibly salty.
I'm glad you asked it. So we don't test, well, let me rephrase that. We do test for specific conductance. And we did see an escalation, a big escalation. However, it's not regulated. And because of where our source water is, the Hackensack, it passes underneath the New York State Thruway. We have all of Clarkstown's roads. They were salting and using brine heavily this year. So that runoff into the source water, there's not much I can do.
And I think this is like part of this kind of public discourse. Because it's like, it's one thing that can't be dealt with immediately. It's understandable even. I actually really get what you're talking about and why that would contribute to that. And especially with ongoing storms, one after another, more salting, more salting, more salting. Totally makes sense, but there was not one notification about that went out. And the only way that there was discourse was through Facebook, when we were all posting about asking each other, is your water salty? Is your water salty? And to be quite honest, I found that to be the most disconcerting part of this process. Not that there would be an interruption in water quality or safety or anything like that, or that I would have to adjust to go and change my water consumption and where I source my water, but more because there wasn't actually any kind of discussion about that from my local infrastructure and government. And I found that to be a little alarming. As someone who grew up with a water quality specialist who knows very clearly about the regulations, who understands EPA compliance, who understands what you have to go through the rigors, I know that you're working at such a high level with this stuff. But I do wonder why that was never, ever a memo or anything that we could have just had a little bit more interaction about. Because I've been buying water for months. So I'm a little confused as to why that has not, I understand this very clearly. It's very, very clearly addressing salinity, which is whether or not you can even drink that water at all. It's pretty intense.
Go ahead, Jack.
If I may, I've been there for a while, 42 years. Back in the 80s, they priced out a pipeline. You could probably add in on this, going all the way to Lake DeForest, eliminating any of the Hackensack water directly coming into the plant. At that point, it was like over $1 million. That was in the 80s. I'm sure it quadrupled, if not more by now. But that was discussed, trying to get away from all the stormwater washing into the river, get it directly from Lake DeForest itself, where it's not affected by the road salt, etc.
Yeah, and the incident that you were referring to, and I'm gonna use the word episodal. We were seeing an escalation, but not an extreme escalation that we hadn't seen before from other winter periods. Okay, it was a specific day where it really spiked, and I had gotten phone calls from the hospital out of concern for dialysis patients, and I got the health department involved on that call. And at the end of the day, even the health department stated there's really not much that can be done because of the source water being affected.
Sure.
So, but as a result of that discussion, everybody agreed that we will start to monitor. And when we see an escalation that may suddenly pop, that we would start to make some phone calls, more specifically to the hospital, out of respect for what they need for their patients. But you bring up a good point, and I'm writing it down, to consider, how do we create an advisory status board or so, even if it's on the website, or just something that can say, we're here, okay? It's not something that we thought about. We never expected to have a spike like that. And I agree with you.
But I think it's inevitable with climate change. Like, that's the thing that we're seeing, right? Over time, we're seeing increasing storm systems, increasing need to solve, increasing need to. So it's like that salinity issue will be something that's part of our climate future as a town. And then I wonder how we will at least notify people as to how this goes down.
So I think the direct answer is, and we did discuss this, all the stakeholders, that there's going to be a reach out to the county, the town of Clarkstown, the Thruway Authority, when it comes to their salting and use of brine. They have to be included because they have to understand how
Right.
we're affected by that. So, you can follow up with me. I mean, this is all part of our master plan moving forward to address these things. So you bring up some good points.
I appreciate hearing that about the throughway.
Yeah.
I do think that makes so much sense.
Yeah.
To loop and to discuss, and I don't know if that will actually change what actually happens on the ground. But I do wonder about just the notification to the public, because I don't think I got anything about this.
Yeah.
And that's what I'm wondering about. Do you think that that will be something that you all will address and send out a notice about? If there's an increase and you're seeing an increase in salinity, to go and say, hey, everyone, this is actually something you might want to be aware of. Because on an individual level, I literally could not drink that water.
So of course, we can't give you an answer right now, because there's a lot of us and we have to talk about it and make a decision and see what the town capacity is to, and what vectors of communication are possible. But thank you for your input, and we're gonna take it and consider options to address it since it is a concern.
Yeah, a very serious.
Do you
Picking up,
still have the system that some of us signed up?
I have, and I'm gonna recommend to everybody to go to our website, and you'll see there is a SMS mass notification. I would like everybody on it, but I'm just caution everybody to understand that I have to view it on an emergency issue. I don't want to just start texting.
Can you, and maybe.
Yeah.
Can you quantify what would indicate an emergency that would
Yeah.
initiate the SMS text?
Yeah, like, I'll give you an example, when we had our transmission line break and we lost all of the village, we lost West Nyack, Central Nyack, the whole gamut. That's an emergency. An emergency could be a main break that affects South Broadway in a way that, the whole road has collapsed, It's a delicate dance to decide at what point do we go into that alarm mode.
Would you,
Definitely.
do an SMS notification if there was a boil emergency?
We can do that. It depends on the size. If it's only 10 houses, then you're now alarming the entire area.
So if it was a mass district oil emergency, you would text it?
Yes, oh, of course.
And if it was 10 houses, then it
And
would be. a
listen,
text if it's
I'm
10
not
houses.
rigid on that. I can change it, okay? I just don't want to suddenly then have people now complaining, why am I getting all these text messages?
Yeah, I appreciate that, and I think it also contributes to some, let's say, hysterics.
Yes.
And and that can be a real thing,
Yeah.
because people can really take this way far in the extreme.
Yeah.
But I feel like even a newsletter that's posted that's like, we've seen an uptick in our salinity, like this season, it might be a good idea to check out, your water and just notice. So it's not, it feels a little bit like you're trying to glean information through Facebook. That's bananas.
Well, I don't mean to be dismissive, but I think there's a personal responsibility that can be enacted here as well. I mean, we all know we had a very unusual winter by comparison to past few. And that, we had seemed like in January, February, every 3 or 4 days, we had a storm. Well, for personal safety, the first thing that hounds do is they brine the roads and they salt.
But-
So I'm not sure why people would necessarily need to be told, hey, there's gonna be salt in your water, look out the window.
Actually, they should
I don't think
definitely be
I don't
told
think
that.
other
That's
people-
not a case in any, wait a second. So, So this might be to speaking to your personal experience or lack thereof. But I feel like even a newsletter that's posted that's like, we've seen an uptick in our salinity, like this season, it might be a good idea to check out, your water and just notice. So it's not, it feels a little bit like you're trying to glean information through Facebook. That's not a case in any way to second. And that I have never had that issue in other places that I've lived around New York. And this might be more focused in the way that the intersection of this throughway and the roads.
Is this your first year living in this?
No, it's not.
Oh,
No, it's not, friend.
So,
It's
Can I,
not.
can I? Can I
That's
ask a
really
que-
important. I really hear you on individual, like responsibility. But this is public information
related to storms.
that not
unless
everyone
you're-
will be aware.
so let me interject, because I hear you. I don't ignore anybody. I think the people that, some people that are here will tell you. If you have a concern, it's never ignored. I'll address it as best that I can, and at some point, I just want to point out that this didn't just happen in Nyack. This happened in Rahway, it happened in other water systems. That's why I refer to it as episodal, okay? However, moving forward, I'll look at how we can do something like this, whether it's a ticker that goes across the top of our webpage. You know, but again, the communication, then doing an outreach to the community to say, hey, listen, this is where you'll get that information. I don't know, maybe there's a
Like a
way.
storm alert.
Yeah.
Like, be advised, the saline content may be
Yeah.
increased due
Yeah.
to weather expected, something.
Very simple,
Yeah,
very simple.
Yeah.
Yeah.
yeah,
I think
it's,
they- I
it's
think they-
noted, it's
I think
noted,
they just want everyone to be proactive instead of reactive.
but understand, if I'm not. And I don't wanna sound like I'm ignoring you now after I told you I'm listening to you. If it's not out of compliance, or I'm not in that zone where I must do the public notification.
Right.
There's so many things going on right now with the water main replacements, us doing all of these improvements at the plant, we're chasing so many things at one time. I can't be everywhere all the
There
time.
has to be a prioritize.
Yeah, that's what I'm trying to say. So I don't want you to think if you're, you feel you're ignored, you're not ignored. But let me examine that. Just like our SMS text messaging, I use a service that's on the internet. We pay for it. Every time we send a text out, it costs so much for each text.
And do we have to be signed up to
You
receive
do.
those texts?
You do. You go to our webpage and you'll see on the left-hand side, there's
I didn't know that, and I'm wondering if everyone knows to do. that.
well, and I've tried to do an outreach, and again, we're short-staffed. We could use a little community help, and if you can do that using your influence on the internet, that's awesome. But just understand, you're not ignored. And I'll definitely see what I can come up, something innovative, and if you have a solution, let me know, just send me an email.
We heard the solution that she wanted.
Yep.
We're gonna take it into consideration. It will be addressed as best we can, but I think we should close this topic about the salinity of the water as it is not regulated. And this is a communication and public affairs. The salty water is not regulated and it is not dangerous. And so I'm not going to get into a argument with you about this.
I'm not proposing
not
that.
the
I
place
would not
for it,
appreciate
but
you
let's
putting that on the record either.
just- Let's just close this particular one. We'll discuss it and address it as best we can. And move on to our next question or topic.
Yeah, okay, picking up on what Jack mentioned before, years ago, there was a consideration of moving the source to
The intake.
the intake.
Yeah.
To across from the thruway, closer to the dam. Have you done any cost estimates about what that entails? Because
No,
that would actually.
Not recently, I think Jack, it was done, it was
20
done 45 years ago, and it was prohibitive then, you can only imagine what it would cost now.
Okay, I mean, but in general, to do an exercise on the back of a napkin to see perhaps something.
Yeah,
That would certainly alleviate the issue with the salinity of the water and perhaps the water quality, because not only do you get the brine, the salt coming into the packet sack, but God knows what else comes in.
Right.
And we are subject to Tilcon, when Tilcon drains into the river.
Right.
We get white water, so this is a constant wrestling match with Mother Nature, so again, if we fail or stumble, it's not intentional, and I will tell you, everyone there is, clearly on board with safety and, you know, to answer your
But
concerns.
this might be an investment, a long-term investment.
Oh, yes.
That will bring down the filtration costs, bring down the remediation costs by getting the intake much closer to that. That's what I'm saying.
We'll ask the question, without a doubt.
You know, back of the envelope type,
No, the engineer's making notes.
That,
The engineer's making notes.
I mean, the village board, you know, we bonded for the 15 million for the investments.
Yes.
So, I mean, that might be a worthwhile thing to consider as well.
Great.
Thank you.
So if there's no other additional questions about the topics we've been talking about for the last while, we're gonna close this out for now and continue with our regular agenda. You folks are more than welcome to stay. And we look forward to having meaningful discussions in the future and some significant changes that we have come to understanding tonight are possible.
Thank you very much for.
Yeah. Thank you for your attendance.
It was very helpful that everybody was able to ask, everybody was respectful.
I agree.
And answers were very good. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Joe. And will this be posted somewhere?
It's on YouTube right now.
And will it be archived? It'll live there?
Yeah, in the YouTube channel, you'll still be, it's archived.
Perfect. Thank you so much.
It's a pleasure. Thank you.